while there was no oxygen for us. And I was sure that I was going to die. And I just said to myself, please, God, just let me die first. I do not want to see Keith dead. I do not want to see Keith suffer. And that feeling of being underneath the ground, left alone, with hardly no water and no food, that you're going to die. I was preparing myself to die.
Hello and welcome to State of the Nation. I'm Eylon Levy. It has been a whole year since the first, last and only hostage release deal. November 2023, a deal that saw over 100 hostages released from Hamas captivity in exchange for a pause in the fighting and the release of Palestinian prisoners. One of those freed hostages was Aviva Siegel, abducted from her home in Kfar Aza with her husband Keith. But Keith is still a hostage of Hamas, rotting in the Gaza terror dungeons over 1 year on. Aviva Siegel joins me on State of a Nation to talk about the abuse she suffered and witnessed in the terror dungeons of Hamas and to discuss the fight for her husband's freedom. Together, we discuss the terrifying moments Aviva and Keith Siegel realized they were being taken hostage into Gaza. We talk about how survivors of sexual abuse in the terror dungeons kept secrets from her in order to spare her feelings, and what she wants you, viewers and listeners of this podcast, to do to keep fighting to bring all of them home, including her husband Keith. Welcome to State of a Nation.
Breaking news out of Israel this morning.
Shocking hostage taking.
Hundreds of Israelis are dead.
I want to bring in Israeli government spokesman.
Eylon. What happens when the 4-day pause?
How do you resolve this?
Where does this go?
Aviva Siegel, welcome to State of a Nation.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for helping me bring Keith back and all the hostages.
It's been a year since you were released from Hamas captivity in the first, last, only hostage deal to date, a year since you were forced to leave your husband Keith in the terror dungeons of Hamas. You gave an interview back in April to Cannes where you said, "The first day I got there in Gaza, I said to myself, these evil terrorists will not touch my soul. I will remain the same human being." It's been over a year since the abduction. It's been half a year since you made that statement. I can't imagine how a nightmare like that wouldn't change your soul. So I wonder, are you still the same human being?
I want to tell you that I am the same human being, but I'm not really dealing with myself now. I'm really dealing with bringing Keith home and the hostages home. So I'm still in Gaza, thinking about what they're going through, what I went through with them nearly every minute of my day and nights. So I haven't really thought about much about myself. And just, a week ago, I was sitting with my daughter and I said something that I've never said before, that I'm proud of myself, the way that I managed everything there in Gaza. And that was the first time that I really let myself feel myself after being back for months. And it seems strange, but I want to tell you that it was from my heart. And I really felt that. I felt that I've never, ever thought about what I really, really feel. So, yes, and I did everything I could to look after myself. I used to sit there and put my eyes down while they were screaming at me with their whole body. I mean, not just with their mouth, with their body. They could have hit me or killed me. And some of the times I used to just say to myself, don't look at them in the eyes. You don't want to remember that face that they did or the way they treated you. Just put your eyes down or disconnect yourself. I think that if there's something that I learned how to do, I used to disconnect myself from what's happening. I had to do that because the most difficult moments for me is when they tortured Keith and when they tortured the girls. For me to see Keith upset and with tears in his eyes, or for me to ask him while he was very quiet. We weren't allowed to talk. I had to whisper. And I whispered and I asked him, what are you thinking about? And he said, you don't want to know. So we didn't continue talking about it, but I knew exactly what he felt and I knew what he was thinking about. So there were lots and lots and lots of moments that, first of all, that I wanted to die, that I said that I've had enough. I've just had enough, and I don't want to be there anymore. And I don't want to feel. So I did a lot of work on just disconnecting myself from their attitude, the way they behaved. I mean, to see a girl that I love, she was with me, and I felt like her mom, being beaten up into pieces while he threatened her with a gun in her face. Or to see them push Keith, or starve Keith, or shout at Keith, or bring a tablet and like just throw it to him while it's dark, and we had to like help him find that little tablet that we could hardly see. So many moments that were just beyond.
I think you should be proud of the way that you not only held yourself in captivity, but since you came out being one of the most vocal survivors of Hamas captivity, speaking up for the hostages who are still there, especially your husband Keith, you've been thrust into a living nightmare that no one could ever have imagined. But when I visited the kibbutzim in the south a few months ago, I spoke to the residents, and some of them told me something very strange. They said they had a premonition on October 6th that something bad was going to happen. A gut feeling, something in the air. And I wonder, take me back to October 6th. Was it a day like any other? Or did you two have a feeling that something bad was around the corner?
You know that they were talking about that something might happen, but in the weekend before, I decided not to be on the kibbutz. My sister reminded me that she said, do you remember the weekend before that you decided not to be there and you were with me in Tel Aviv? So...
Why was that? Why did you decide not to stay on the kibbutz?
I remember that they were talking about things that could happen, that maybe the war's going to start, or I can't remember exactly the words, but I got the feeling that something's happening, maybe up north, or maybe in Gaza too. And I decided that weekend that maybe Keith and I should not be there. But the 6th, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel that anymore. I think that whole week they weren't talking about it anymore. Maybe the week before on TV they were talking about maybe things that might happen. And so I calmed down and I said, okay, it's my house. I've been living there for more than 40 years. And everything's going to be okay. It's, you know, like everything, it's like waves. Sometimes I was very scared, and sometimes I used to relax myself and say that everything's okay. And then something happened, and the wave came up. And that's the way that I'm also dealing with what I'm feeling now, because I can't be sad all the time. So I'm sad most of the day, but like part of the day, I'll have a piece of cake. I'll enjoy it, or I'll laugh with one of my grandchildren, and I'll enjoy that too. I have to allow myself to be a person also. Also, I can't allow myself to fall, because if I fall, then who will bring Keith back home? Because I know what Keith is going through. You know, like all the families that are talking for their loved ones to come back, and they haven't been there. It's different. It's completely different. Being there, seeing the torture in my eyes, feeling it in my heart, I know what they're going through. And I'll do everything I can. So I'll keep strong, and I'll do everything I can to scream out for them, because they're screaming like I did for 51 days.
There's so much I want to unpack with you about what happened there in captivity and the fight for the hostages' freedom, but I think many of our listeners will not be familiar with the story of what happened to you on October 7th. So if I can ask you to relive that, how did you and Keith get to be abducted into Gaza?
So Keith and I ran to our little shelter at 6:30 in the morning, like the whole country. Most of the country went into the little shelter. And there were 2 rockets. And we were just used to it, because we've had those for many, many, many years. We didn't even close the door of the little shelter, and we didn't close the window, because we don't have time. Sometimes there's like the alarm, and then there's the explosion. So we didn't have time. You don't even have the time even to close the door. So we didn't. We just hid against the wall. And after 2, I said to myself, and Keith said, okay, we can go out. So we went out. And through the window of the room next to the shelter, we could see Gaza, because we're very close to Gaza. And we saw all the missiles, and we saw the missiles go every direction. So I knew that they're going to Tel Aviv, because we know. I've been outside many, many times with the rockets going all over the country and seen how high they are. So I could see that the ones that are high, that they're going far, and most probably to Tel Aviv. And I remember that second of looking at that and thinking to myself, what's happening? It seems and feels like the end of the world, because you can hear them. The rockets leave Gaza. We're so close. And in 2 seconds after that, Keith and I were back into our little shelter with another rocket on Kibbutz Kfar Aza. And we closed the door, we closed the window, because we understood that something really bad is happening. And I remember looking at Keith in the eyes and saying, it seems like the end of the world. What's happening? And then I took my telephone. I was lucky because I took it with me. Keith didn't. He wanted to go and bring his telephone all the time. And I did not let him, because it was in the kitchen. And I was scared. I didn't want a rocket to fall on him. I didn't think about terrorists at that time.
At this point, you don't realize it's an invasion. You think it's another barrage of rockets, just more intense.
Yeah, and you think that you know what's happening, because you've been in your little shelter thousands and thousands of times. Thousands. During more than the 20 years we've been in that little shelter, more than thousands of times. I've slept there. Lots of nights, just not to be in a place that you don't have time to run.
Because you have how many seconds in Kfar Aza to run for shelter?
Sometimes not even a second. And sometimes 2 seconds, and sometimes 5 seconds, but not much more than that. And Keith and I were sitting there, and I was starting to shake, because I'm very scared of everything. And Keith always tries to calm me down. Don't worry, we're okay. I'm with you. We're safe. And I wanted to believe Keith, but I couldn't, because, it just took me into so much fear. What's happening? And then shortly after that, somebody on the WhatsApp group of the kibbutz wrote that she can hear noise that we've never heard before. And that was Hamas terrorists killing people already. And shortly after that, somebody wrote that Ophir Lipstein was killed, somebody from Kfar Aza. And I remember that feeling, not understanding what's happening. I mean, terrorists next to my house, and people have been killed. What, did they go outside? How did they get killed? So immediately I told Keith, we have to lock the window. We have to lock the door. So he locked the window and the door. And Keith said, okay, we're safe. But we sat in a place in the shelter that if they shoot through the window, then it won't hit us. And if they shoot the door, so it won't hit us. We thought about everything. And then I was trying to think, where should we hide? The cupboard will be too small. We're big people. And underneath the bed, I think there's not enough room for us to lie down. So maybe I was trying to think, maybe we can climb out the window and hide somewhere outside. And I was starting to think. And then I thought to myself, what's happening in Israel? What's happening to my sister in Tel Aviv? And we were disconnected to Ynet, to the internet, so we didn't know anything. And I remember writing in the family group, can anybody tell us what's happening? And nobody answered. Nobody answered. And then my son, that's 40 years old, wrote that he's holding his fingers and that he can hear Arabic outside. And we got disconnected from Shai. I took that feeling that my son was killed. I was in Gaza for 51 days, and Keith and I were talking about my dead son. We were sure that he was dead because he's got a dog, and I was sure that they shot his dog, and then he screamed at them because he loves her so much. She's like sort of a person for him. and that they killed him. So Keith and I are sitting there thinking about my son, worrying about him, thinking that he might be dead, and trying to figure out what's happening. And nobody answers us in the family. And just by not answering us, I understood that something really bad's happening. And then my daughter said that we're the strongest people in earth. And another daughter wrote, just keep in contact with us all the time because we're worried about you. And my sister said, when you can, come to Tel Aviv. And just a couple of days ago, I asked her, why didn't you answer when I asked? And she said, I was scared because I knew that there were terrorists on the kibbutz. I didn't want to frighten you. I didn't know if you knew that there were terrorists. So they tried to protect us, but we went to Gaza with not knowing anything. The only thing we did know, that it felt like the end of the world, when they took us out the window of our house, the back window, we could see houses on fire. And we saw lots of groups of terrorists on the grass.
The terrorists abducted you by pulling you out of the window of your safe room?
No, not the safe room, and the window that I was watching the rockets. They came, we heard them coming close to the house, shooting the house. Keith and I were just holding our hands like close to each other and looking at each other in the eyes. We were scared to open our mouth because they were just next to the door. And then we heard these steps. I'll never forget those steps of theirs in the house. And I looked at Keith and I said, they're here. And the door just opened. It just opened. It made a bit of a noise when it opened. And 15 terrorists just shoved themselves in to see who they caught this time. And what saved our lives, for sure, 100%, Keith put his head on his knees and his hands on his head while I stood next to him and I screamed. I just screamed. And they pulled Keith up. They tore his shirt, and everything was done in such a brutal way. They shot us. They started shooting us inside the house and pushing us. And they took my hair and pulled my hair and pushed me. And when we were outside, when they took us out of the window, I could hardly get to the ground. They pulled me down. I remember nearly falling, and they pushed Keith, and they pushed me, and Keith fell, and they broke his ribs, and they shot Keith on his hand. It took part of his skin off. So he was bleeding and sore, and we were frightened while they were shooting us.
Then how did they pull you into Gaza? In a jeep, on a motorbike?
No, they took us in Keith's car.
In Keith's car?
In Keith's car. And Keith, when they asked him to do the code of the car, Keith turned around to me and said, they're going to take us to Gaza. We better run away. And I said to Keith, just do what they say because they're going to kill us. And I'm lucky that he listened to me because he wanted to run away. And then in the car, I sat next to Keith and sat next to a terrorist with a knife in front of my face. And the one in front that sat next to the driver had a gun and was pointed in our faces.
On the morning of October 7th, I remember we, still in Israel, were watching in horror as we received videos on Telegram of hostages being dragged into Gaza, the jeering, happy crowds. Was that what happened to you?
Exactly. I remember going out of the gate and shaking, and then I saw this photographer. The people that got the videos of me on the Telegram, I remember the photographer. I remember his camera. It was a white one. He was a tall, dark. He looked like an Arab. He looked different than us. And I'll never forget his face. While I was shaking, and they were just shouting Allahu Akbar. They were just the happiest people in earth. And coming into Gaza, there were families with babies, older people standing with their sticks and clapping their hands and shouting and shooting in the air. And the happiest people in earth, while I was shaking, Keith was shaking, and we just didn't understand what is going on. What are we doing in Gaza with our pajamas? Keith is 65 years old. I'm 63. We didn't fight with anybody. We never fight with anybody. We just want peace, and we want good for everybody. What are we doing there?
And then you get smuggled into a tunnel.
You know, I want to tell you that I wasn't standing on earth when it happened, because I'm very scared of everything. And I remember just disconnecting myself from that situation, but I'll never, ever forget the smile of the terrorist that was there underneath the ground, the happiest person in earth, while I wanted to cry and shaking. And he's doing this. And they shouting, the Hamas terrorists that were with us in the house were shouting at us that we need to go down now, as quick as possible. And I'll never forget that ladder, like shaking, while I was shaking, going down, and he pulling me down before I even jumped down, just like pulled me down as quick as possible to hide me there.
They make you climb down a ladder into the tunnel.
Yeah.
And you're literally getting dragged into the bowels of hell.
Yeah.
Talk to me about life in captivity in the tunnel. You have been one of the captivity survivors who've spoken most vocally, I would say graphically, about the abuse that the hostages endured in Gaza. And I'm wondering, are there still things that you are keeping and won't say out loud until this is behind us?
Yeah. I'm sorry. You know, I've got 4 children. And when I look at them and I tell the story of what I went through, and I see the tears in their eyes, I don't want to say more than I say. But there's stories and feelings. We went through hell. We went through so much. There wasn't a moment that I could tell myself, okay, just relax. It was like the death was over my head all the time, thinking about what's going to happen next, because everything was just worse than what happened. And I used to tell myself, you're going to go through worse. Be prepared. You're going to go through worst. Just prepare yourself, because it's going to get really, really tough. And that's what happened.
I remember at the time reacting in disbelief as a Sky News journalist said that the hostages were being held in reasonable conditions. This was before the full horror began to emerge, but already it was clear that you were going through hell. I understand you don't want to share everything, and there may be a time and place, and maybe you never will share that. But what can you share with the world about the abuse that you witnessed in the Gaza terror dungeons?
Yeah. First, I want to say that I'm a very strong person. And when I was abused, it was okay because I could handle it. I could tell myself, okay, so they're going to push me, they're going to pull my hair, they're going to do things that are crazy to somebody that's just an innocent person that's 63 years old. But the worst moments for me were when they tortured Keith and they tortured the girls. So,
what do you mean by torture?
One of the girls, when she came back from the bathroom, I knew that I wasn't allowed to hug her because we weren't allowed to show any feelings. We weren't allowed to cry. I used to hide myself crying, lie down, put my hand on my head, and cry very quietly that nobody will see that I'm crying, because if they did, I got hell. We just had to say that everything's okay, pick our fingers up like this and say tamam in Arabic, while nothing was okay. So she came back from the bathroom and I could see she was shaking. And she looked sad. So I just got up because I felt like her mother. And I said, I'm going to hug her. I'm going to hug her. I don't care. I'm going to hug her. So I got up and I gave her a hug. And immediately, a second later, this Hamas terrorist came in and started screaming at us. And I saw him. She was with her head towards the other direction. And I looked at him in the eyes and I said, don't worry. I love her. Because I didn't know what happened. And I was sitting on the floor. And I remember her talking to Keith and to the other girls that were with us. We were 5 at that time. And they were whispering. And I couldn't hear because my ears can't hear because one of the missiles about 13 years ago really damaged my ears, and everything that was happening there, I couldn't hear while they were whispering. And I remember them whispering for quite a while, and everybody was sad. Everybody, the atmosphere in the room was different than when it was before she came in. And I didn't know what happened, but I could feel that something happened. And then she came up to me and she said, Aviva, she whispered, and she said, Aviva, I want to tell you something. And I looked in her eyes and she said, you touched me. And she told me what he did. And then after a couple of weeks, one of the girls told me that Keith asked them to protect me, not to tell me hard things, and to keep hard things away from me because they're too difficult for me. So I do know that she didn't tell me everything, and that she thought about how telling me and what telling me, because she knew, and she respected Keith, and she respected me. And I know that the girls did that often. They just didn't tell me. Because I remember one of the times that Keith said about one of the girls, you must do everything you can to help her. But he didn't say more than that. So I didn't understand. But now, being here, I understand that the girls went through things that I don't know. When Keith comes home, maybe he'll be able to tell me. When the girls come back home, they'll be able to tell me. And that was just one thing. And the other time, he called one of the girls out of the room, and he brought her back after a second with a gun in front of her face and told her to get dressed. They used to dress us like, looking like Arabs with the hijab. And while she was bending down to get dressed, she turned around to us and she said that she's scared that he's going to take her and she's going to be alone. He took her hair, pulled it, and threw her in such a brutal way on the floor. I remember like her falling backwards with the gun in front of her eyes, in front of my eyes too. And he said to her, one more word, I'm going to kill you. They took her, they handcuffed her, they put a blanket over her, and 4 terrorists that were with us, they all hit her. And hit her, and hit her. And after maybe 20 minutes, she came back, and she sat like a little child on the floor, weeping, red. Her hair was standing, and she was beaten up all over. And I could not get up and give her a hug because I was scared. But I did give her love by looking at her in the eyes and trying to be with her. And after a couple of hours, I went up to her and asked her, how come you didn't scream? I wanted to scream for you. And she said, I did not want to give them the pleasure. I was just so proud of her. So it was just like all the time, different tortures. If it was they tortured us and didn't give us food while they chewed and ate in front of us. I mean, who would do something like that? Why? Why would anybody sit in front of somebody that they didn't give us food for more than 20 hours and eat in front of us and look at us while we're looking at them and wanting just a little bit of food? But we don't. We have to sit on the floor on a filthy, dirty mattress and wait. So the girl with us, she asked, when are we going to get some food? And he looked at us, and I'll never forget that moment either. Without even blinking, he said, it takes a long time to make food. And 4 hours later, we got half a piece of pita that was dry, that I had to take water to drink it down. That's how dry it was. So I said to myself, okay, tomorrow morning you'll get a little bit more. Wait. And we got another half a pita. And that was the moment that I started hiding food for Keith. He lost a lot of weight. I lost 10 kilos while I was in Gaza. And Keith too, I'm sure. So I decided that every time we get a piece of pita, I'm going to break it in half. I'm going to bring a piece of tissue, and I'm going to hide it underneath the mattress. And that's what I did. And the girl, after a couple of days, said, I'm going to throw it away. You're not going to eat it. So I said, no, we'll eat it, even if it's bad, because we were starving. We were starving. And water, so many times, we didn't get any water. And so many times we got just a little bit of water from a bottle that the terrorist had been threatening us all the time, that he drank most of the water and just left us a little bit of water of the bottle that he drank from. So one of the days, I was starting to feel really bad. I had an infection in my stomach most of the time that I was in Gaza. And I asked Keith to ask for water again because I was too scared to ask for anything. And Keith begged. And he looked at me and he said, but I've begged so many times and you saw what happened. So he took the bottle and didn't say a word, and he just held the bottle like this and waited for the Hamas terrorists to bring us water. They were drinking water. And he looked at us and he said like this, as if, what are you doing? Knowing exactly what Keith was doing. And then 15 minutes later he came and he like grabbed the bottle like that, filled it with water because there was water in the tap. And I could see that the way that he was walking from the tap to us, because we were like hidden behind a sofa on mattresses on the floor, and I could see that something's going to happen. And I remember him like looking at us, and he just like threw the bottle at us. Why? I just don't understand the behavior.
I hate invoking Holocaust analogies, but when you hear stories of people smuggling half a crumb of bread here, half a crumb of bread there, it's impossible not to have flashbacks to that dark period. You spoke of this girl who was wrapped in a blanket and beaten by several Hamas terrorists. I understand, for obvious reasons, you won't tell us who she was. Is she still trapped in Gaza?
I don't talk about the girls because I want to protect them. But these young girls are really, really suffering there. And we have to do everything we can to bring them out.
I respect that. When you were dragged into the tunnel in Gaza, were you thinking, surely it's only days until the state of Israel strikes a deal, sends in Sayeret Matkal, gets us out? Or are you thinking, oh my God, I'm stuck here forever?
Okay. So first of all, the first days, I thought it was minutes, not days or hours. I thought it was minutes that I'm going to be taken out of there, because I was taken in my pajamas and I didn't fight with anybody, and I was taken from my house. So what am I doing there? I thought that they're going to come and take me out. But I want to tell you that after maybe 20 days, I was sure that I was forgotten, that I'll never, ever get out there, and that they don't know where I am or where Keith is or where the girls are. And I was sure, because the Hamas terrorists used to tell us all the time that there's no Israel anymore, that the whole world is bombing Israel. So we haven't got any place to go back to. And they said that we're going to be like Gilad Shalit, and that means that we're going to be there for years. And I believed them. I just, most of the time, try to figure out how to survive. If I'm going to live, what's going to happen to Keith? Are they going to torture him again, taking him into the shower, shave him, looking like an Arab, and laugh at him and make a joke out of him? Or are they going to hit him again? Or if they're going to put black material on our eyes and take Keith in such a brutal way out without me down 3 blocks of stairs. Because that's exactly what they did to me after Keith. While I had to figure out where to walk.
What do you mean down 3 blocks of stairs? This is a multi-story tunnel complex?
Yeah, that place that we were in, we were underneath the ground and we were in houses. We were moved 13 times. And that time, they put material on our eyes and I had to figure out where to put my next step. And I tried to hold the Hamas terrorist shirt and he pushed me while I nearly went flying backwards, not seeing anything. It was pitch dark.
And then after 50-something days, 50 how many?
51.
51. That must have felt like an eternity. You're free.
Yeah.
What happened?
First of all, I want to take you to one of the times that they took us down to a tunnel. And that was one of the worst experiences that I will ever go through in my life. Or Keith. I hope so, because I don't know what's happening to Keith now. But they took us down into a tunnel, and we were walking down. It was dark and slippery, while the Hamas terrorist took care about himself because he was walking with a torch in front of us. And we're trying to walk down, and we're walking and walking, and then he turns around and he says, don't worry, 40 meters underneath the ground, and he said, city, don't worry. I couldn't see a city there. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't see anybody. And they took us to a little arch that was small, and he did this with his hand, and we knew that's our new house. So for the first 2 hours, 2 Hamas terrorists stayed there in the entrance, and they were talking and talking, and then suddenly it was silence. And I remember us saying, what, we've been left here by ourselves? And the girl with us, she went there and she peeped, and she said, they're not there, they've gone. They just left us there. And us walking down the stairs, we could feel that there wasn't a lot of oxygen for us to breathe, so we were like huffing and puffing down. And then we were sitting there and we felt lucky that we can talk. So we spoke a little bit until we didn't have any strength to talk. We were just lying down on mattresses, filthy, dirty ones, on the floor there, looking at each other and trying to figure out if we're going to live. There was no oxygen there for us, so we were just trying to breathe. And after more than a couple of days, Keith looks at me and he says, I feel like I can't breathe. And I looked at him and I said, just lie down and try and breathe. And just try and breathe. And that's what I did. And the girl with me did. We were just trying to breathe while there was no oxygen for us. And I was sure that I was going to die. And I just said to myself, please, God, just let me die first. I do not want to see Keith dead. I do not want to see Keith suffer. And that feeling of being underneath the ground, left alone, with hardly no water and no food, that you're going to die. I was preparing myself to die. Because we were left there alone, just the 3 of us. And I'm lucky that I had the strength to comfort Keith and to be with him. And I'm lucky that he felt comfortable to tell me that he feels like he's going to die. And I'll never, ever forget the moment that we touched the air for the first time and we breathed the air that was in the earth. And I said to myself, air. It was the most delicious thing. Chocolate's delicious. It was the most delicious. I don't know if it's the right way to say it, but it was one of the moments that I'll never, ever forget because I felt like I'm going to live. And that's just a very, very special moment. But we weren't told that we're going to go through hell after that. we thought that we were lucky because they took us to a house with 2 terrorists. They threatened us, starved us, hit us, screamed at us, frightened us, all the time. All the time. We had to lie down from 5 o'clock until the next morning, until about maybe 9 or 10 in the morning, and not move. We weren't allowed to stand. We weren't allowed to move our bodies. And I remember being complete and utterly caught, and Keith was caught. And not to talk about Keith's ribs that were broken. They used to force him to sit. While he could hardly sit, he could hardly breathe with his ribs broken. And I even tried to help him some of the times. And I used to beg them, just give him 5 minutes, just 5 minutes to relax his body, to let him lie down. And they said no. Keith's 65 years old. And I just want to tell you a little bit about Keith. He's American. He comes from North Carolina, Chapel Hill. His father was a professor of public health. He taught in UNC. Many, many people from all over the world. And he came to live in Israel. We fell in love very, very quickly. I got married. I wasn't even 20 years old. I was a week before I was 20. Because Keith is the most special, gentle, loving person he knows. And he does not deserve to be there. He does not deserve to go through hell like he's going through. And it just doesn't seem right. It seems like the cruelest thing he knows, that us, as humans, know what they're going through and that they're still there.
None of the hostages deserve to be there.
All the hostages.
Obviously.
Yeah.
And since you were freed in the hostage release deal in November, you've been extremely vocal campaigning. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about your conversations with government officials. To what extent you feel that they understand the crisis of the hostages and really are doing everything they can to get them out?
I've got a feeling, it's just a feeling, that Biden is trying to do everything he can. Everything he can to get them. I believe that he really understands Keith's situation and all the hostages that are there. With Bibi Netanyahu, I feel that it's different. I'm not a politician, but I can tell you what I feel. Keith and the hostages and the girls that I was with and the hostages that are still there, Emily, that's my daughter's best friend, and Gali and Ziv and Doron from Gaza, they are still there. So Bibi Netanyahu is not doing enough and does not understand. I've got a feeling that he just does not understand in what kind of danger the hostages are in, because he's killing them slowly. Keith is rotting underneath the ground with the hostages that he is with. And I just pray every day that Keith is not alone, because we do not know. Even if Keith's alone, we don't know anything about Keith.
Why do you think the Israeli government doesn't understand the crisis of the hostages? Because, if I can play devil's advocate, I think the government would say, as much as they have a responsibility to bring home the hostages today, they have to make sure that Hamas can't take more hostages tomorrow. And that means maybe the government is prioritizing the ultimate defeat or destruction of Hamas over bringing the hostages home, for fear that, leaving Hamas standing on its feet would allow it to take more hostages in future. Is that your sense, that the government is torn between that dilemma, or do you think the decision makers are really apathetic to the hostages' plight?
I do not really know what to say. I just want to say that Bibi doesn't have a heart. But Keith has a heart. I have a heart. Keith's family, all the hostages' families have hearts that are broken up into pieces, and I just don't understand how Bibi Netanyahu is allowing himself to leave them there for one more minute. 1 more minute is too long. Can you think about yourself being underneath the ground with no oxygen and thinking that you're going to die? Or can you think about, or anybody that's listening to me, about any mother that's got a daughter there, that's just lying on a filthy, dirty mattress on the floor and thinking, am I going to be the next one to be raped? Are they going to rape me here next to my friends that they can see? Or they're going to starve me and eat in front of me again? Or not bring me water? Or hide myself crying when I need to cry because I'm not allowed to feel? No mother, no father wants their children to go through something like that. No wife wants their loved one to go through something like that. Keith and I have been married for 43 years. To think about Gali and Ziv from Gaza, twins. They're 27 years old, underneath the ground. Their mother is finished. All the families, we are just the saddest people in earth, screaming out for our loved ones.
Have you met the Prime Minister?
I've met him. I've met him a couple of times. I've sat around the table with him, with Biden, the same table. And I got the feeling that he doesn't want it to happen yet, because he's got other things to do. But I try not to take myself to moments like that and try and tell myself, don't try and understand, because you won't. I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand what's happening in the world. I don't understand how, I don't even understand how all the good people in Gaza are still in tents. Why doesn't anybody stand up for them and say enough is enough? Because they need to go back home too. We need to go back home. I don't have a home to go back to.
You said just now that you believe that President Biden has been doing everything he can to bring the hostages home. And I heard you say that as well after your last meeting with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. In my interviews personally, I've been very critical of the US for not pressuring Qatar. I said that after the elimination of Sinwar, they had an opportunity to demand that Qatar extradite Hamas's leaders, force them to surrender, release the hostages. That is a point of leverage that the US has over Qatar, the country that is hosting the leaders that are still holding Israeli and American captives. And I wonder, do you really think there's nothing else the US can do to help secure the release of the hostages?
I'm sure that they can do much more, much, much more. I do know that they do want the hostages out, but I do know that the hostages aren't here. And I do know that the stories, it's not only stories, the words that I'm telling everybody from the bottom of my heart, and everybody knows what they're going through, is the worst thing that any human could say, okay, so it'll take a year. Okay, so it'll take 2 years. Everything's okay because they are not okay. So I want to wake up Biden. I want to wake up Bibi Netanyahu. Stop thinking and start feeling, because we've all had enough. The hostages have had enough.
After the savage execution of the 6 hostages in September in one of the tunnels, the families wrote a gut-wrenching column that I'm sure you've read in Time magazine, expressing their really profound pain and frustration with world leaders who talk the talk but didn't walk the walk and haven't really helped them to secure the hostages' freedom. And I want to quote you just a part of it because it's so powerful. They wrote, "For 328 days, many of us traveled the world and met politicians, diplomats, business titans, celebrities, people with power. They made us promises, nodded, held our hands, cried with us, hugged us tightly, and then failed to deliver results. Celebrities met us in secluded rooms but asked that we never acknowledge publicly that they did so. They feared losing followers." Have you had meetings like that?
Of course I have. I know exactly what they're talking about, and I feel the same.
What are
but
they
I want to
talking
tell
about?
you that Hamas, they're responsible. They're responsible of what Keith is feeling now and the hostages are feeling now. They are responsible of what I went through. And they took us with our pajamas from our house. They need to release them. So I do know that it's very, very difficult, but I do know that the leaders of the world have been chosen to lead a better world. And they can't allow themselves, they need to wake up now. They cannot allow themselves to let the terror win and the bad win, because that's not the life that anybody in the world needs to go through. So they need to wake up and understand that that's why they've been chosen, to figure out how to move, how to bring them back. Because it's the cruelest thing in earth. They're not just in an ordinary prison.
They said that they met with celebrities who offered comfort but asked them not to share that they'd met because they feared losing followers. I'm wondering whether you know who they're talking about, if you've had those conversations too.
Yeah, of course.
Who?
Well, I can't say either, because I'm trying to protect Keith, because I need them. I need them still to be with us and do everything they can. So if I've been told that I can't talk about different things, I won't.
Are these celebrities working behind the scenes to help you?
I want to hope so. I want to wish so. I want to believe so. But Keith and the hostages aren't here. So they haven't done enough. And for my care, they haven't done anything, because Keith is still there for 388 days. When I saw the moon...
As of the time of filming right now.
Yeah. When I saw the moon, when I came out, I looked at the moon. I love the moon. It smiled to me. I hadn't seen the moon for 51 days. Keith and the hostages are still there, rotting underneath the ground and dying slowly. So I want to ask anybody, is that okay? Is that okay? Because nobody wants that for anybody. And I don't want that for Keith, and I don't want that for the hostages.
The families went on in that very powerful time column. They wrote, 251 hostages from 39 nationalities were stolen from their lives and from the world on October 7th. Why did the presidents, prime ministers and foreign ministers of those nations never stand arm in arm on a global stage and demand their release? Where is the global outcry calling for their release? Now, I know you're not a geopolitics expert. You're a survivor. You're processing, you're fighting for Keith. But I wonder whether you have an answer to their rhetorical question. Where is the global outcry? Where are those world leaders who are chosen to lead?
I want to ask them too. Where are they? Where are they? If they're listening to me, where are you? How come you're allowing something like this to happen? It's your people from your country. Keith is an American. He paid tax to America until he got kidnapped. For 64 years, he paid tax to the country that he belongs to. Where is the country? What are they doing for Keith?
Do you have an answer?
No, I just want to cry. That's all. I just want to cry because I'm the saddest person for Keith. And I do know that I'm just a simple person screaming out for all the hostages. And I'm going to continue doing that until they come back.
You're crying out and screaming for the hostages. And at the same time, somehow you have to try to take care of yourself. And you said right at the beginning of the conversation, you're not even thinking about that yet. But you're also a mother of 4 children who are there for you. And I'm trying to manage, I imagine, that own impossible balancing act of somehow continuing with their own lives while fighting for their father's freedom. And I know that your daughter, Shia, said on Ulpan Shishi on Channel 12, she was engaged to be married just before October 7th, and she said that she vowed that she wouldn't get married until Keith is free and he can walk her down the aisle to the chuppah. How did you react when she told you that?
I can understand her, but I do want them to get married. I want them to have babies. I want them to surprise Keith maybe with a little baby. But I do understand. I really do understand. And I want to tell you that I'm lucky that I have my 4 children and my sisters and Keith's family, because they, with me, with all their heart, doing everything they can. My kids haven't gone to work for more than a year, and all they do is try and figure out how to bring Keith back. One of my daughters got 3 children, and she's been to the States with me 7 times, and she left her children at home. And she's had enough. And she said to me, Ima, it's hard for me to leave my children again. We've all had enough, but we're all doing everything we can. And they are keeping me strong. And I want to just thank my children for everything that they're doing for me, my family, my sisters, Keith's brother, Keith's sisters, and just for everything that they're doing.
How do you hold a family together when you're not working? I mean, at the most basic sense of financially, how are they coping?
It's difficult. It's difficult. I can tell you that it's very difficult, and I would wish it differently. One of my daughters said, Ima, I've got 3 children. I'm going to have to go and work. So I said, maybe go and work with children, because it's, you know, it's the time, it's easy. You'll come home when your kids come home. And she said, no, I think that I need to work not with people, that I don't have to be happy, that I can just be sad while I'm working. And I just pray that Keith will come home, that she'll be able to go back to her life, because they don't deserve to live how they're living. And she, my daughter, deserves to get married with Yuval and have children like she wanted and prayed for herself. And everything needs to go back to normal. But we're living in such an abnormal time. Everything seems wrong.
You've been living with your family. Most of the displaced families have been put up in hotels. I visited in a hotel in Shefaim the families of the 4 other remaining hostages from Kfar Aza. This was at the end of August, the Steinbrecher, Berman, and Damari families. I was hoping to see you there as well, but you were with your family. And it suddenly struck me that, you know, we talk about displaced families, survivors of October 7th, hostage families. Sometimes they're all in one, and sometimes they're also survivors of captivity, and they're 4 in 1. And I asked them, I know it's difficult to think ahead to the future, past the day when you get your loved ones back. What do you need in order to go back to Kfar Aza? Right? We say bring them home, we mean home. Do you plan to return to live in Kfar Aza?
You asked me a question, and you can answer that, because you know what I need to go back to Kfar Aza. I need Keith back. I need my life back. But if I'm planning to go back to Kfar Aza, I can't imagine myself putting myself on my bed, on my cushion, and going to sleep. Because I was woken up at 6:30 in the morning by terrorists that took me. So I can't believe that I would be able to manage to do something like that and feel calm, because something really, really bad happened to me and to Keith in a house.
What would it take for you to be able to go back to Kfar Aza? Or have you said, once Keith comes back, we're moving somewhere else in Israel, Kfar Aza is too haunted for us, we'll leave it for the next generation?
I don't even think about Kfar Aza these days. I don't. The only thing I think about is bringing Keith and the hostages back. That's all. I don't think about my home. I don't need anything from my home. I don't really need a home now. I just need Keith, and I need the hostages. A home for me doesn't mean anything. But my family means a lot, and I know that I'm trying to do everything I can when I'm with my grandchildren. Every time I'm with them, I tell myself, be strong for them, because they've got their whole world, their whole life to go through. And I want them not to be sad like I am.
It's completely understandable, of course, if survivors of the massacre of captivity don't want to go back to Kfar Aza, but I know many of the residents do want to rebuild the community, and that's part of our country bouncing back from this horrible tragedy. And, you know, Israel's under a lot of pressure now to accept a ceasefire that would essentially allow Hamas to remain in power. in Gaza. Well, we want to get the hostages out, but there's pressure for a ceasefire that would leave Hamas in power, right? And allow it to rebuild and regroup. And I wonder whether you think that Kfar Aza can be rebuilt if Hamas is still in power in Gaza.
I can't answer that because I don't even think about that. I don't think about Hamas, and I don't think about Kfar Aza. The only thing I think about is Keith and the hostages, because I want them back, because I was there and I know what they're going through. So it's too far for me. Maybe in a couple of years, while Keith will be back and all the hostages will be back, you can ask me that question. But now, it's too much for me to even think about what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. I do know that it's for the leaders of the world to figure that out, because everybody needs a better life. Women in Gaza should not have babies in tents. Older people should not live in a tent for a year. Somebody needs to scream out for them. They need to go back to their lives. Hamas cannot control this world. Look what they're doing with all the terror. They're ruining their country. They're ruining their people. Their people, I'm sure, are begging to go back to their lives. But they're controlling. The evil is controlling, and the Hamas is responsible for what is happening to the hostages and to their people in Gaza and what's happening in this country. So they should stop. Somebody needs to stop them.
Aviva, listening to this podcast will be thousands of people who are screaming and crying every day with you. Jews around the diaspora, allies who've been pounding the pavements every week, going to protests, putting up hostage posters, including of Keith, even when they're torn down. And they just want to know, what else can they do to help you? What can I do to help you? So I'd like to give you an opportunity. Tell me if you'd even like to look straight in the camera and tell viewers watching around the world, what can they do to help you bring the hostages home?
So we're in a critical moment. The hostages, they need us to get out and scream. Can you imagine your husband or your daughter or your grandfather to be there underneath the ground begging to be taken out? So I want to ask you all to be with us and feel for us and feel for them, and to go out to demonstrations and scream for the hostages as loud as you can. Talk about what I have been talking about with your family, at work, wherever you can, to help. You can wear a pin or a red ribbon or anything that you can think about, that people will understand that they haven't been forgotten, because we cannot allow ourselves to forget them. They're there underneath the ground, screaming to be taken out.
Aviva, you spoke so much during this podcast about how you were afraid, how you were scared, but in our conversation you struck me as the most astonishingly brave and courageous woman who's managed to tap into reserves of courage that I don't know where you find them, to speak up for Keith, and God willing we will get him and all the hostages home very, very soon.
Thank you. Thank you so
Aviva.
much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode of State of a Nation with Hamas captivity survivor Aviva Siegel, whose husband Keith is still trapped in the Hamas terror dungeons. If you find these episodes informative, please follow and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on all social media platforms. Please share the link, share the episode with a friend who needs to find that courage to speak up and shout out and scream more for the hostages until every single one of them is home. I'm Eylon Levy, and thanks for joining us.